use this just as an opportunity to make sure that oh, good. Thanks, Kristen. I almost forgot that recording will be helpful later. As I said, I really want to use this as an opportunity to make sure that what we discussed in December still feels good to everyone. The subcommittees are moving along, and that we anticipate being able to stick with that August deadline that we all discussed last time. And then I want to do some committee report outs, but particularly in the context of what, in whatever context the committees want to report out in. But I put sort of a strategy for the 2025 plan as sort of a blanket item right after the committee report outs, because I want to discuss what came out of the last unit generation subcommittee meeting, and which may or may not be helpful for the thinking for some of the other subcommittees, but we can get to that when we're there. And then we've got a blanket other business, so if folks have any other items they want to bring up, we can chat then. All right, I'm going to take down the agenda so we can all see each other. All right, there we go. And it's an absolutely packed house here at National Life today. It's a good thing I reserved the big room just for myself. So I have plenty of elbow room. Why don't we go ahead and, I think this is just council members, so I don't think we have any members of the public with us that would want to chime in public comment, but I'll open it up. Does anyone happen to have someone in the room with them that might want to chime in for public comment? Okay. We'll go ahead and close public comment. So I can lead with the legislative updates, but then I'm going to look to the rest of you all to chime in with your items, because you're going to know about a lot of stuff moving that I don't. So I can talk about sort of the housing and land use side of things. As folks recall, the governor and the administration introduced a bill, a housing bill known as Path for Vermont. While the bills themselves are just going to sit on walls, items from Path for Vermont have been brought into two different committee bills. The committee bill for the House Committee on General and Housing, and then the committee bill over in the Senate, Economic Development, Housing in General. The two chairs are trying to work together to make sure that different components of our bill and other pieces are brought in. So to walk through a couple of those pieces from the governor's bill that will end up over in the the two committee bills. There's some changes to VHIP, a lot of just language updates, just as we've operated the program now, and we found where language was vague or could be more clear or precise. We've made some updates there, largely with help from our friends over at AHS. So thank you to that team, as well as a lot of help from the home ownership centers. So are leaning on our partners a lot there to make those updates. We're also making some changes to VHIP. If folks recall, there was sort of a weird tweak to VHIP last year that I think the language came from the House Committee on Human Services, but it was not language that we or any of our partners ever got to testify on. And actually, when the language was inserted, we weren't made aware that it was inserted, and it was a substantial change to VHIP, which made basically the requirements for both the 5-year and the 10-year options exactly the same, which is sort of a logical flaw. So we presented that at the end of the session last year to the chairs of jurisdiction, and they allowed us to continue to operate VHIP as originally designed. And so we submitted language this year to fix VHIP, to go back to sort of the original intent, which was we've gone through a lot of discussion with House Human Services Chair, House General Chair, Senate Economic Development Chair, and everyone's on board with changing the VHIP language largely back to the program as originally designed, so that we will continue to make sure there's the coordinated entry requirement for the 5-year, and then sort of broader requirements for the 10-year. So that was a really good development. So we're working on finalizing that, but it came out well. Bigger stuff. There's a lot of appeals reform being discussed right now. I bring that up because this is largely in line with what our last two tactical action plans have discussed, unit generation. And, I'll express gratitude to this group for bringing some great ideas forward on appeals reforms. Those help to sort of serve as a base for the reforms that were proposed in the governor's bill and that are now being taken up in some of these committee bills. Changing the standard so that frivolous appeals are reduced and rebalancing, I think, in favor of home building. So for the first time in a while, I think we have a real shot at seeing some substantive updates to the appeals system in Vermont. So we'll see where it goes, but this is a really good step in the right direction. And I certainly credit this group for, speaking with one voice to help move that along. So really, really excited there. You're also going to see a lot of investments in various existing programs, as well as some one-time investments. So some one-time investments include through VHFA's programs, middle income homeownership development, and rental revolving fund. There's also a big push. I assume folks have been hearing about it. Big push for funding and financing tools for infrastructure. So I think if you go basically anywhere, you talk to anyone who's trying to develop housing, they're going to tell you that one of the biggest hurdles here in Vermont is that there's a lack of infrastructure, or where we have infrastructure, it's at capacity or it's expensive to extend, et cetera, et cetera. And so recognizing that those costs are getting folded into projects right now and raising this per unit cost, which people are so concerned about, there's a broad acknowledgement in, I think, the development space, in the housing advocacy space, and throughout the legislature that we need to do something to help fund and finance infrastructure so that it's not all just falling on the projects and getting rolled into the unit costs. So a couple items that are being taken up that were in the administration's proposal, again, largely as a result of conversations that happened with this group, include some funding that is being directed to the Vermont Bond Bank to help fund and finance infrastructure that will directly support home building. There's also this big conversation around various forms of what's known as project-based TIFs. Again, I want to give credit to this group who project-based TIF is really sort of has been stuck in the muck for a long time, but this group went ahead and put it in the tactical action plan and called out project-based TIF specifically. Our members from VLCT also helped to make sure that we included that language. So, really important that we included that in our tactical action plan, and that conversation is moving forward in the legislature now in a way that it really hasn't. I mean, it's really stalled out in the legislature in years past, but now because housing advocates are saying there's a need here, we're seeing progress. So that's another initiative that I think you will likely see something come out of the legislature this year. And again, that these project-based TIFs are a scaled down version of the TIF concept focused on a specific project so that you can use the future increased value of these parcels to fund the infrastructure for these projects. So taking a chop right out of one of those biggest upfront costs that developers face. So it's wonky and it's not sexy, but it's really, really important. So thanks to this group for helping to advance some of those conversations. It's crossover week, so it's a really big week in the State House. We're going to find out a lot about what has legs and what doesn't. I think you're going to see a lot of scurrying around the State House this week. There are a lot of committee chairs feeling like there's a lot of pressure. It's no secret that the session got off to a slow start. I don't mean slow in that there was a shortage of ideas. I mean slow in that there was a backlog of bills getting introduced through Ledge Council, et cetera. And so in January and then through February, you had a lot of people looking at their watches saying, where are all the bills? What's going to happen here? So, there's been a flurry of activity, and this is going to be quite the week. So anyone who spends any time advocating in the State House or has connections to committee chairs, representatives, this is your chance to make a substantive dent in the direction of the session. So keeping in mind that this Friday is crossover for policy bills, and next Friday is crossover for budgets. I just encourage anyone who wants to advocate, whether it's items particular to what we've suggested in this group or just items important to you, reach out to legislators, particularly who have jurisdiction over this. Okay. Why don't I kick it? I almost forgot again to give more credit to this group. There are folks heard a lot about over the last couple of years regulatory reform and changes to zoning and bylaws, and then changes to Act 250. And this group, again, did a really good job of identifying very tactical and specific other state permitting processes that could do with some updates, including we've talked about brownfields, corrective action plans, wetlands. And I think in part, thanks to the discussions that have happened in this group, those are all also advancing in an exciting way through the legislature. So just more kudos that we're continuing to round out the conversation. That in part will inform the comments I'll make when we do committee updates, but I'll set that aside for now, and maybe I'll open it up to others, whether from the AHS team or anyone else that want to provide some updates on items important to them. And I'll just say, there's a lot. The BAA, the Budget Adjustment Act negotiations were, I think, have been a pretty high profile thing. So, I don't know if anyone wants to add anything on that, but that's all kind of playing out in pretty open air. So I think folks know that's been a tough thing to navigate, but it's also pretty clear that the BAA isn't going to be the end of those conversations. So just tune in, watch what happens throughout the rest of the session on those topics. All right. Before we move on, anyone want to add in any legislative updates, either with budget items or any pieces of legislation that are moving that they want to draw our attention to? Yeah, Lily.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everybody. I'm Lily Sojourner, the Director of the Office of Economic Opportunity. I think as the commissioner said, this is going to be a really busy week as they push to kind of reach the Friday deadline. House Human Services has blocked off a tremendous amount of time this week for H91, which is tackling general assistance emergency housing. And I think indicating that they want to make some pretty significant changes there for this year, maybe the year after. So I would just call folks' attention to that. We don't quite know yet. I think it's going to be shared today for the committee to see. They did they kind of struck what they had been looking at previously. So just again, for folks who are interested in that, I would call your attention to pay attention to their group this week, and we will be as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lily. This group will definitely want to keep an eye on that. Seeing Zach's name also flag another item. Folks may or may not have been aware, the governor in this push for funding for infrastructure and recognizing a few different items and recognizing that projects have been struggling to get over some of the initial hurdles as a result of infrastructure costs, various types of infrastructure costs, but also in acknowledgement that the governor wants to support our most flood-prone communities and resilience in those communities. We internally, the Agency of Administration, Agency of Commerce and Community Development, worked together to, we brought together a list broad list of projects that we had from conversations with regional planning commissions, projects that we know that are on funding lists elsewhere, et cetera, and then filtered through those criteria that I just discussed, and chose 3 projects to give additional support to through the capital bill. So not a funding source that we traditionally use to fund housing, but the governor, again, just wanting to bring every resource to bear possible to bring units online. Those three projects, and Zach, I hope it's okay. I'm mentioning this because it probably puts you in a funny position to bring it up yourself, so I'll be the one to bring it up. The 3 projects that were chosen were, again, in 3 flood-prone communities. So Bennington with the Ben High project, in recognition of the incredible lengths to which they're going to flood-proof that building in the heart of their downtown that is in a flood risk area. The Winston Prouty project, again, Brattleboro. This is a reuse of their campus to add a lot of housing to their campus where they have a shortage in the community. And again, it's a community that has been really beaten by floods in the past. And what's known as the Prospect Heights project here in Berry City. Open field, but it requires $4 million of infrastructure just to get the project started. That project has been supported by NBRC dollars, a large NBRC award, and now has $1 million carved out of the capital bill to go to the municipality. Those 3 projects, for all the reasons I mentioned, are high priority for the governor, high priority for the legislature. And so while it's unusual to fund housing out of the capital bill, it was really important to the governor. So that's another item to keep an eye on. The Senate has signaled strong support for that, and we don't imagine any trouble getting it through the Senate. The House Committee of Jurisdiction, Corrections and Institutions has been a bit more hesitant to just sign off. So we've been navigating that, and all the projects have been really great at being transparent and providing as much information as possible. Zach was in to testify and hit it out of the park with the committee, just to emphasize not only is it an important housing project, but also incredibly important for the community and the economic vitality of the region, and that really in every way, all aspects of the Ben High project serve the most vulnerable in the community. So it was a really impactful testimony. Zach, you're welcome to add anything if you want, but I don't want to put you on the spot.
You did great, Alex, and thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And again, kudos to Zach. He's crawling closer and closer to that close date, and I think really impressing everyone with what they've been able to accomplish. So kudos there. That's going to be a really tremendous project. Okay. Why don't we move ahead now? I guess before I do, anything else legislative related we want to discuss? Okay, thank you. I want to roll into our committee report outs now. Does anyone want to go first? No, Chad or Dave or Chad? Okay.
Sure, I'll jump in. I'll be brief. So the Special Populations Subcommittee is working on information gathering. We've built out a schedule targeting 6 specific populations over the course of 6 months between January and June. In those monthly meetings, we've been inviting leaders in the field of their respective populations to come in and talk to us about current offerings for housing and resources and potential ideas for things that we could include in a tactical action plan. We've to date heard around families and children, older Vermonters, and folks who are medically vulnerable. And we have slated time in the next 4 months for substance use, mental health, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and others with disabilities, and justice-involved individuals. So we're making sure that we've got a wide net of experts coming in, covering many different populations that have special considerations. And once we are done collecting information, we're going to take each individual recommendation for these populations and try to consolidate, condense, and have a product for the larger group come August. So that's where we're at.
Okay, good. So sounding like you are still feeling good about that August timeline that you all actually led the way with, that we're all now going to try to adhere to.
Yes, I think we're on schedule.
That's great. Thanks, Chad. Anyone else from that subcommittee that wants to chime in with any thoughts? You guys are taking a great systematic approach, so I really like it. Yeah, Dave.
Yeah, I'll just say I want to give a lot of credit to Chad and Adnan as co-chairs of the committee and all the committee members for really stepping up. Not only are there experts in, their respective populations, but even within the subcommittee, there are actually, 1, 2, and sometimes 3 or 4 people that are taking the lead on reaching out to the experts in the community and scheduling and setting an agenda and making a recommendation back to the subcommittee as a whole to consider. And so I've actually been out for the last 5 weeks, and the lion's share of the work has fallen on the shoulders of Chad and Adnan. I'm going to be working a limited number of hours for the foreseeable future. So just a huge thank you to the whole committee for stepping up and really being active participants in the whole process.
Yeah, that outreach is so key. I mean, I can speak for our subcommittee. I think where we've really achieved the best results is where we've had good conversations, pulling in folks from the field. And we're obviously fortunate to have some of those folks right on the subcommittee, including Zach and others, but pulling in more minds on this has been really great. So thanks for leading the way with that on your subcommittee there guys. Nice job, Adnan and Chad. I know Commissioner Winters is tied up, I believe, until 10:30-ish. So is there anyone from his subcommittee that wants to provide an update? It's okay if not, but. Okay, why don't I can give a quick update from the unit generation subcommittee and just talk a bit about where we're at, and we actually just had a really good discussion that's going to inform our strategies going forward here. So in terms of outreach, I think there's still some really good opportunity to have folks in. One member from the development space that I'm looking forward to bringing in that I've had some recent contact with is Evan Langfeld from O'Brien Brothers. Folks who know about development up in the Chittenden County area know that they have been bringing hundreds of units online, some in partnership with Summit and others, really mixed income developments and really different types of housing types, large multifamily buildings that serve folks of all income levels, duplexes, townhouses. So really a lot of, you could say, missing middle design taken into account in their in their projects. So anyway, I've had some really good interaction with Evan, who, again, is able to point to very specific items that are anywhere from small to significant hurdles in their steps towards bringing units online. And so he's sent a nice list with some good explanations of what these items are. And I think the unit generation subcommittee is going to benefit from bringing him in just to have a conversation with him. And we'll continue to identify others like him who work on a variety of different projects, so we can just continue to hear what hurdles people have in the field. But on that, the conversation at our last subcommittee meeting was, I guess, a bit more big picture. Sorry, I forgot I never closed the door here. And by that, I mean, we sort of took a step back to reflect on who our audience is, and recognizing that there is the governor has historically and appears to intend to continue to waive executive privilege to release our tactical action plans publicly and utilize them for testimony in the legislature. It does still present an opportunity that we as a council are making recommendations to the administration. Many of us are, inside the administration, and this is also an opportunity to hear from folks on the ground, hear from stakeholders, and systematically catalog items that the administration can take actions on. So, I'll give some examples to try to distinguish. So our past tactical action plans regarding the, forgive the camera, I don't know what it's doing. It's supposed to be a smart camera. It's not that smart. So we focused a lot on what I would say the broad regulatory conversations that are already happening. So, for example, we've the items I brought up before. This council made recommendations on various types of Act 250 reform. It's made recommendations on appeals reform and all these items that require legislative action. It is really important that this council is on the record on those to make it clear that those are significant impact items that need to be changed and regulations that need to be reformed in order to advance our work. That said, we also have a unique opportunity to take a look at other types of permitting processes and other structures that perhaps present an opportunity for the administration, given that technically the administration is the literal audience from this of this report, to point to say whether it's permitting within our own agencies. I'll pick on my own just because that's the least likely to offend anyone here. Historic preservation review is a key aspect of many projects, housing projects, and I'm sure Catherine and others, Zach, folks that have been involved in or aware of various housing developments where there have been challenges with the historic preservation review. Well, this presents an opportunity for us to come together, hear from folks that have experienced those challenges and say, hey, administration, here are things that you can do to improve the historic preservation process that would make housing, home building easier. Hey, administration, these aspects of the Department of Environmental Conservation permitting processes could improve. Jenny Gus has been really, really great about getting us to focus in on corrective action plans with, when it comes to soil remediation and other contaminants. Those are all really, and I want to give more credit here, when we think about the name of this plan, tactical action plan, those are specific tactical items that we can focus in on, and we can provide that to the administration as a service to say, look, you can get moving on these in ways that you see best fit. Now, part of our thinking here, and I'm interested to hear what other subcommittees think, as the unit generation subcommittee was finding itself in this cycle where we would make recommendations that pertain to legislative action, regulatory reform in the legislature. Well, so what that would mean is we'd make these recommendations and then we'd have to wait and see how they move through the legislative session. And then it's really hard to have those conversations during the session because we felt, well, you need to wait to see where they land before you can make new recommendations sort of in reaction to what happened. If we stayed in that cycle, we found that we would continue to be stuck with this sort of June to August timeline to do all of the work of making recommendations, waiting to see what reforms were enacted, what we would have liked to see better. And really, this is a council that can and should be operating year round. So how can we not get stuck in that sort of legislative cycle, giving ourselves just a couple month timeline, but look at systems that are can be updated without legislative action? And so that's part of what moved us in this direction. And I can say, coming out of that, our subcommittee was really excited, really charged up about maybe turning to the things that are not going to get headlines, are not going to be exciting, but they're going to be impactful for our folks that are trying to advance projects. So I'm really excited about this direction for the unit generation subcommittee. Other committees, maybe contemplate how that could fit into your work. But I'm happy to take any comments on that direction.
Just want to appreciate that. I think, why wait 6 months if we can make progress now on something? I think it's a really great approach.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And thanks to VHCB team too for being such a good source for ideas in that space too. And Catherine, I saw Catherine a minute ago, but Catherine and her team and the RPCs in general are just, there's a wealth of information from you all. So really appreciate. Catherine had to jump off. Oh, everybody tell her I complimented her, please. While we've got these people coming together in these meetings, let's make use of their knowledge. All right. I think Commissioner Winters is still tied up. So before we move on, does anyone from that subcommittee want to chime in with any updates? I know he said it's been, I think, like us, tough to meet during the session. So I'm not sure that there are significant updates from the last time we met, and that's okay. Sounds like he has a plan to pull you all together soon here.
Yeah, Alex, I'll just second that. It has been several weeks since we've been able to connect due to just legislative and other priority items, unfortunately. So, yeah, we don't have much of an update.
That's all right. That's understandable. I know everyone in these subcommittees also ends up getting pulled into the legislative process. So that's okay. We're all doing the hard work. Okay. Thank you all. So that's a productive segue into this next item. I put it on the agenda as strategy for the 2025 tactical action plan, but really by that I wanted to reaffirm that what we discussed in what we discussed in December still makes sense for everyone. As a reminder, that's sort of giving ourselves an internal deadline of let's try to have our tactical action plans, at least as subcommittees, wrapped up in August, so that we as a council can go in strong and let September be our sort of finalizing, polishing, get it in a good place work. So it is advancing our timeline from years past, but it's trying to avoid sort of a last minute crunch. What I heard from special populations is that still feels good to them. I know the unit generation subcommittee, I think, is still on board with that. And so unless I hear differently, I think everyone's still good with the timeline. Is that I'm seeing positive? Okay, good. And the other piece of that is just I want folks to think about, is there a different way to reframe the questions we're asking ourselves? That's what we did, as I just discussed with the unit generation subcommittee. But who's the audience? When we think tactical, what do we mean tactical? How specific can we be? What can we actually move the needle on? I think one thing that we acknowledged in our subcommittee is we're now on the record. On some of these big ticket items, we are now on the record. And at least our subcommittee is going to make a point to some extent, report out each year on items we've previously recommended we want to include in our report. Here's progress that have been made in these areas. But we are on the record on those, and now let's continue to find new things to weigh in on. So, Anyway, I'll hop off the sort of the lectern there. Anything else? Yeah, Monica.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mic. I don't know if this is entirely connected, Alex, but as you've been just talking about the tactical action plan and like who the audience is and being on the record, I think the one thing that I have bumped up against, and I think I've said this before, so I apologize if I'm on the same old soapbox I've been on. I get sort of stuck with the number of strategic plans, action plans that get created that end up being primarily focused on we should spend money here and we should be investing in this and this should be where we should have this much more spend here. Like I feel like I would love it if we could spend some energy thinking about sort of the policy and practices and anything new or different or exploration of other ideas versus just or exclusively staying sort of focused on where resources should be spent. I feel like it sometimes feels a little bit frustrating because we don't necessarily have control over that. We can certainly make recommendations, but it also feels just very kind of limited, right? We're not, like, I just am thinking about Chad and all of the research that he just talked about doing with those special populations. So what are the best strategies for housing? Like what more is there other than let's invest here? Because we don't have, and I've just come from a bunch of budget conversations, so I apologize if my like negativity is spilling over. I just think I would love to challenge us to go a little bit deeper in the next round of recommendations. So it's not just where do we think we should be investing, and we're sort of beating that drum, but more like what should we be investing in and why? Like why is this proven? Why does this work better? And then I think it also allows people to hear those recommendations with a little bit more openness, because if you just are hitting them with, we got to spend money here, everyone's like, oh my God, we don't have any more money. Right. So I'm just going to challenge us to think about the next round of recommendations a little bit more programmatically or philosophically is the wrong word, and I'm not coming up with anything better, but sort of that deeper dive, like what we can offer is a little bit of expertise, a lot of expertise when I look at the people on the screen around what works well and why it does and how we should be addressing things, and just I think we should just be a little bit broader in our thinking. And I worry that it sometimes defaults to, here are the programs that we have, here's how we should be investing.
Yeah, Chad, please go ahead.
There's not much that keeps me up at night, but I think this is one of the items that does. And I think you bring up a good point, right? When we talk about special populations, there's often the question of price tag and what's going to be funded, right? But I think the question that I'm looking to answer over the next 6 months with the special population subcommittee is, how do we take what we have and the many different resources that are confusing to our populations and consolidate resources so that an individual in need can go to one place and get whatever voucher from whatever funding source that they don't care about where it comes from, but how can we make it easier for them? And that's I think exactly the direction that we do need to go in addition to the funding question. But how do we make things easier? How can we shape policy and practice across the state to make housing more accessible? I think it's a great point, Monica.
And I think you both touched on, in a way, something that came up in our discussions as a subcommittee, which was almost asking everyone to set aside sort of their favorite talking points or the biggest ticket talking points, which is going to be a challenge for me. I'll be candid, but it'll mean, okay, Alex, set aside your talking points on appeals reform, because the administration will go and advocate for appeals reform. The home builders will advocate for appeals. Like, we already have conduits to advocate for those big picture reforms that we've already been on the record. We already have conduits through which to advocate for funding for certain programs. We don't need to weigh in on that. If it makes folks feel better, we can always add sort of a lead-in sentence capturing that this is not in lieu of those other big picture things. This is not in lieu of funding. This is just saying, in recognition of what we have, we're going to dive into some operational specifics. And to me, that requires all of us sort of setting our organizational egos aside. And anyone who works with me knows that's a huge ego that I've got. So I got to set that aside and just look at what are Monica, I think what you're alluding to is operationally. What can we do operationally to move the needle within the confines of our regulatory system and our resources? That's a really hard question to answer, but there's also meat on the bone there, and I want to move the needle there. So to me, I'm excited at the amount of energy I see around that. And I think that's a huge opportunity. Okay. All right. Well, no one protested when we said that, so I think we're generally okay. And you know, really, this is the bulk of what I wanted to cover today. So I think we're now in my favorite placeholder, other business, which is just, yeah. Oh, Dave's got some other business. Okay.
Well, I don't know if it's a blend, right? So, really appreciate the thinking and the, direction in terms of the tactical action plan this year, and agree with this sort of yes and approach to things, both legislatively and, from the administration side, both from a funding and, to Monica and Chad's point, more of an operational, like, policy level lens and perspective. In previous years, we've attempted to keep the number of recommendations from each subcommittee to a manageable level. And I'm just curious, as each subcommittee's thinking about, moving in that direction, are we wanting to frame it up with a certain sort of limited scope in terms of number of recommendations from each one? Or do we want to take a different approach this year?
I wrestled with this too, because I know everyone sort of took on that hard task with this past tactical action plan. And I think it was valuable, right? To sort of rein in the scope so that it's not just a laundry list. I'll say this, I am not capping us. I'm not going to say keep yourselves to 2 or 3 recommendations. What I'll say is I'm deferring to you all as the experts. Just know that I think as a council, we all agreed last year that I think a smaller number of impactful recommendations is going to, I think, make a greater impression. But, we don't need to confine ourselves to 2 or 3. Look, if you can find 5 attainable operational changes within your space, I'd say go ahead, go for it. I guess I defer to the committees. Does that make sense to everyone? I think continuing to exercise sort of restraint and not just throwing out a laundry list, but also look, if there's something that can move the needle and you think you're not asking too much, then put it in. And then as a council, we'll all have a chance to weigh in on everyone's. And if unit generation comes in with too long of a list, the full council can say, hey team, maybe focus on your biggest handful of items here. Dave, I realize I didn't give you a direct answer to your question, but does that kind of help? That's just how I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful to just acknowledge that we're trying to thread a needle here, that there's lots of really great ideas, there's lots of passion and energy, and if we want to catch people's attention, a big long list is not necessarily the most effective way to get people's focused energy around some ideas. And so, I think it'll be challenging, and I think there may need to be some back and forth with the full council when we get to that point. And I think it's enough for each of the subcommittees to be wrestling with in the next several months.
I think you're right, Dave. Okay. All right. Other items. So big thanks to Monica for working through the tactical action plan with the 5th floor team and making sure that is ready to get published. I think there's some final editing things that are happening now, and I believe Kristen indicated that we'd be able to have that published later this week, and the full group will have a link to where it's published. Everyone here has at least seen or been sent a copy of the final plan at some point, but just seeing the where the final version is posted, I'm sure will be easier, so you can point folks to it. Sorry for the delayed process this year. It got mixed in with a batch of other things, but we'll get the link out to everyone. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, Daniel.
Hi, thanks. A couple of things. One is I was on the Housing and Homeless Alliance Vermont meeting right before this with Kathleen and some other folks. And it really kind of brought to my attention, I think after Kathleen left, just Hyman with CBOEO mentioned that HUD had terminated, I think 80, if I'm correct, grants for fair housing across the state. And then there was also mention of continuing resolution for potential 70,000 vouchers being proposed for cut. And I'm just wondering, as part of like prevention, I guess, if there's any discussions happening on the state level to deal with these kind of unexpected massive changes, and how to prepare for them moving forward. Another thing is I really second what Monica and Chad were saying about kind of looking at more operational improvements, because yes, there's limited state funding and there's scarily enough limited federal funding now, but I think improving efficiencies and structural systems is really important, particularly something I saw with, I think it was CDPG, a report that came out from you guys about the merging of like the Rutland Bennington housing providers. I think that's really exciting, along the lines with kind of Down Street and Lamoille Housing Partnership. But I think maybe that could be, I see those happening on a piecemeal, but only, and it's coming from the individual providers, and it's very laborious and long, but I wasn't sure if along those lines with this group, there could be more of a proactive, like, assessment of what's a more effective and efficient way to provide services, not just housing, but also services in each area, and maybe the encouragement of those mergers more.
That's two great points, Daniel. Thanks for bringing that up. I mean, on the first side, I can't speak to some of the other more service oriented federal funding and how folks are thinking about trying to close new gaps that arise as a result of this. But I know on our side of things, we've been in, I won't say wait and see, because we're talking to our partners as much as possible to get the best information we can. Just for example, about what we can anticipate with our CDBG allocation, what we can anticipate with the Boston HUD office who we work with. Is there still safety in our disaster recovery funds? All of those things. We're trying to just sort of ground truth what we're hearing, and combining that with not trying to react to something before we know. And so, I can't speak for the AHS team and how they've been thinking about this, but I know for us, we're just trying to move forward and continue to do all the work, say with our con plan and then our action plan with the disaster recovery money, assuming it's coming through. But it also means trying to get creative about what other sources we can braid it with, or what are ways we can stretch these dollars. So maybe, maybe there are certain projects that we wouldn't fund to the level that we thought we could, but what are sort of the ways that we can invest in them to have the greatest impact on moving them forward. It's a concerning conversation, but I think something we should think about. But the second part, Daniel, which I think is a really nice tie-in to your point, to the conversation we were having earlier, looking at our systems and the efficiency of our systems. I mean, I think that is a place for this group. It relates to conversations that's happening all over the state right now. If you think about how we govern ourselves, the discussions around councils of government rather than, sort of strictly municipal oversight of things. There's a lot of regionalization talk, thinking about an emergency preparedness watershed, or thinking about sort of the watershed regional approach. And same thing now that we're seeing with some of our nonprofit housing providers, et cetera. This council absolutely, I think, has a role in making recommendations in that space. It's never easy because there's a lot of stakeholders in those conversations, and you can very easily upset people's sort of clear way of operating and doing things. That's also part of the reason we're here, though, right? To come together, and if we see a tough recommendation that could be impactful, I think we can do that. So I think that's a really, really good suggestion. So thanks for bringing those up.
Along those lines, do you know if the proposal from the Department of Mental Health on increasing housing subsidy and care program was moved forward in the BA at all?
I'm looking to, I don't know if Monica, would you have, Monica just had to step away. I don't know if we have anyone else with the AHS team that would be aware of that. If not, maybe we can just make a note, Kristen or Netta, to check in with Monica, and she can follow up with the group on that. Thanks for mentioning that, though. All right. Other items while we're in this other business, or anything that you just want to flag for future discussions, so we could put it on an agenda for the next council meeting? Okay, good. Well, all right, folks. I think that checked all the boxes of what I wanted to get out of this meeting. I hope everyone feels good about our progress. I hope everyone has a good spring. KK or Netta, do we have a date to share for our next council meeting?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think one needs to be scheduled, and we can go for June or July, but it's kind of getting close to that August date as well. There might be.
I think you're spot on, Kristen. I would lean towards end of May, beginning of June, if that works for folks, for our next council meeting. So perhaps we'll target either the last week of May, first week of June. We'll get information out to folks as soon as possible so that everyone can plan. But again, we usually try to stick to either the 9 to 11 or the 10 to 12 time slot. So just be aware of that. If anything comes up between meetings, you know how to reach myself, Commissioner Winters, or anyone on the team here. So go enjoy a couple warm days. SAP's going to be running, so go sugar up your kids and all that. All right. Thank you all. Really appreciate your work.
Thank you.
See ya.